Hey, Pastor Bryan here, and I want to talk about the Discourse Analysis Tool for Bible Study. That's just a fancy way, I guess, of saying the grammar Bible study tool, the grammar tool. The grammar tool helps us understand the flow of thought in sentences and in paragraphs so that we see the point and we see the argument. It's used a lot when we read, like, the epistles or when we read discourse. This tool is a really, really helpful one to have in your toolbox because it helps you to see the meaning and the purpose of the author and what the author is communicating by way of all these little connecting tools. And when we don't see some of those, sometimes we miss what the author is trying to communicate, or we miss the purpose, or there's lots of great tools for doing Bible study. This one is trying to help us really see what is actually being said. And if we get this wrong, it can be really problematic. I'll give you an example. My wife saw an advertisement for a women's Bible study in the Old Testament. It said, we'll be studying the Old Testament, but there will be great food. But is a contrasting word. And so it makes you think that the Old Testament study is not great, but the food will be great. If they had said and, it would be we're doing a Bible study in the Old Testament and there will be great food. So as you can see, these words convey meaning and purpose. And so the grammar tool is really helpful, especially in the epistles. So what I have in front of us is Romans 7, verses 4 through 6, so we can see this a little bit. And I want to focus on a specific aspect of the grammar tool. Imagine for a moment the grammar tool is like a socket wrench. You have a socket wrench, and then you have all the sockets, and each of those sockets fit a different size nut, and they do a little bit different work in the same way. So that's kind of how the grammar tool works. The sockets are your connecting tissue words like therefore and but and for and before and because, therefore, so that. It's all those connecting tissue words that sometimes we're tempted to skip over. I want to look using one particular socket at what happens when we read Romans 7, 4 through 6 using the socket that looks at so that or in order that. When we see so that, we have a bit of a cause and effect relationship in the purpose of the sentence, and it reveals a lot more. So imagine for a moment I said, I am going to McDonald's so that I can meet a man I'm buying a car from. Going to McDonald's isn't really the important part of this. Meeting the person I'm buying a car from is an important part, and so going to McDonald's is helping to explain the location of that meeting and giving me some detail. But the point of the sentence isn't Bryan is going to McDonald's. The point of the sentence is Bryan is meeting a man to buy a car. Right, something like this. So McDonald's is an important part of that, but it's not the point. Sometimes we read things like Romans 7, 4 through 6, and we see things like, we were put to death in relation to the law. And so people will say, hey, we're dead to the law, so the law doesn't have a hold on us. End of story. But when we use this tool, we start to see a greater point, and we start to see the meaning in this. So watch this. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you also were put to death in relation to the law through the body of Christ. Man, that's great, but there's more. So that you may belong to another. Hey, there's a purpose here. This is why this happened. There's more going on in the sentence. And then it continues, you belong to him who was raised from the dead. Wait a minute. In order that, here it is again, we may bear fruit for God. And look at this. Here's what the point of this is. You belong to another. You can bear fruit for God. Let's keep reading. For, that's one of those other socket sizes. When we were in the flesh, the sinful passions aroused through the law were working in us to bear fruit for death. But now we have been released from the law, since we have died to what held us, so that, here it is again, we may serve in the newness of the Spirit and not in the old letter of the law. You see that? We have these purposes that are built right into this that follow the so that. The so that's becoming really helpful tool to help us to see the bigger purpose of what Paul was communicating, inspired by God, here in Romans 7:4-6. Now, there were lots of other connecting tissues that could help us quite a bit too. Therefore. And as you're just going through it and you start to notice them, say, hey, what is this particular word but? Wait a second, why? But's a kind of a contrasting word. Oh, that's because we were aroused to fruit for death. Yay, but now we have been released from the law, and this just continues to go on. So these connecting tissues are incredibly important, and it is the grammar tool that helps us to see these things and just think deeply about what's being communicated and rightly. So I just want to encourage you start training your eye when you're reading to catch a lot of these tools, especially the so that's, because as you're reading through, say, the epistles, they will become incredibly fruitful in just opening up the meaning of the text.